Hello, and thank you for joining today's acquisition seminar hosted by the Federal Acquisition Institute. Industry Day conferences are one of the most important but oftentimes misunderstood meetings held between government and industry. So how do we set up and conduct a meaningful and well-defined Industry Day conference that ensures both sides, government and industry, engage in a way that leads to success for all? To answer that question, we have representatives from government and industry who will take a look at the elements that make a successful conference for both sides. This seminar will include discussions on defining conference purpose and goals. That is, what's the government looking for? Inviting appropriate conference attendees, establishing conference structure and arrangement, explaining proposal evaluation criteria, emphasizing the importance of price, and clarifying data reporting requirements. At the conclusion of the seminar, you'll have a checklist to follow in designing and participating in the optimal conference. Before we begin, let me remind you that we will hold a live question and answer session at the end of today's seminar. If you have a question about anything you see or hear, we encourage you to submit it at any time using the survey link to the right of the video screen. We will collect and review your questions during the seminar, take a very short break, and then return to answer as many as we can. So now, let's join Melissa Gary, Procurement Ombudsman for the U.S. General Services Administration, as we explore Industry Day conferences through the eyes of our government and industry guests.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Melissa Gary. Welcome to the second session in our series of learning seminars titled, Can We Talk? In this session, we will focus on Industry Day conferences. Industry Day conferences are held by agencies to present a plan for a current or future procurement to representatives of industry. They provide an opportunity for the government to express their goals and schedule and solicit critical feedback about a particular procurement. These conferences also provide a good opportunity for industry to get a clear understanding of what the government needs and to shape the RFP towards a unique offering. So, there are benefits to both the government and industry. Pre-solicitation or pre-proposal conferences are the most frequently held of these conferences and will be our primary topic today. I have joining me today a panel of experts from government and industry who will share their insights into creating a successful Industry Day conference. To my right, I have Bjorn Miller, who's a contracting officer with the General Services Administration. Next to Bjorn is Nancy Ballet. Nancy is the Director of Acquisition Operations at GSA. To my left, I have Mike Pullen, who's the Director of Strategic Operations at CGI Federal. Next to Mike is Jim Connell, Vice President of Contracts and Compliance with Red River Computer. Thank you all for joining us today. We know that pre-solicitation or pre-proposal conferences are not necessary for all requirements. However, with large, complex, or new requirements, it can be an invaluable resource to the government in terms of fostering early engagement, better acquisition planning, increasing competition, and identifying new and innovative offerings in the marketplace. I'd like to start our discussion by reviewing the differences between a pre-solicitation and a pre-proposal conference, and then shift into the purpose, goals, expectations, and ensuring meaningful outcomes of a pre-solicitation conference. So, pre-solicitation versus pre-proposal. Let's talk about some of the differences. Bjorn, I'm going to ask you to start.
Sure, thank you. Well, the biggest difference, a pre-solicitation conference, as the name suggests, is ideally well before the final solicitation is actually posted in normally FedBizOpps. The government strives to, on a high-level, strategic level, get information from industry to shape the acquisition. Pre-proposal conference, requirements are further defined. We have a better understanding of what we need, what we want. It's more detail-oriented. What I would add, procedurally, for a pre-solicitation conference, the entire acquisition team can speak to it. There's more openness, more dialogue between the government and the and industry. In a pre-proposal conference, process procedures are more structured. The contracting officer, perhaps, especially if it's after the solicitation is posted, is the focal point of who industry should be engaged with. Those would be the biggest differences between the two.
Yeah, wow. So Mike, what do you see as the differences, or do you see one being more valuable than the other to industry?
Well, let's start with the valuable question. They're both valuable, both to industry and government, and it really is more a segment of time. How far along is the government in developing the requirements? How much input is needed in order to develop appropriate requirements, and figuring out where they are in that process. So in a pre-solicitation, it's really more about, do we have the right requirements? Are there capabilities out there that exist? Where do those capabilities exist, and how can they be addressed? In a pre-proposal, the requirements are a little more defined, and it's really more refining those. What makes it better? Are there things that haven't been looked at that should be considered, and should we think or talk deeper about some element of those requirements in order to move them down the line? And one of the things, especially for industry, that is to get a better understanding, figure out what it is that the government's looking for, and how we can best meet those requirements, and how we're going to approach it.
Wonderful. Jim, do you have anything to add to that from industry's perspective in terms of expectations?
In terms of the differences, one is early, one is a little later in the process, but the expectations, I think, really are pretty similar on both sides, but certainly from industry, the expectation is to find out what it is the government wants, how the government wants to do it, when they want to do it, what makes sense. And then the other side of that is the expectation that industry has something to say, and this is what industry can do. Hopefully those two things are pretty similar, so that everybody's happy in that equation. But it's mostly an expectation of communication. What it is the government wants, when, how, why, all that sort of stuff. And then what can we provide without revealing the secrets too early in the process. But where's this going? What's it going to be? And is it going to be a good, solid procurement that serves the needs of the government?
So could I add to that? Just on the pre-solicitation slide, I'd just like to add that at that stage of the game, from the government's perspective anyway, one of our primary goals is to give industry as much information as possible, as soon as possible, not only about what the requirement is, but what our acquisition strategy is, what we might see our evaluation criteria to be. The more information we can give you about all those things, our timelines, the better prepared you are, hopefully, to know whether this is something you may want to continue to pursue. On the pre-proposal side, in my experience anyway, the solicitation is typically on the street at that point. I like to focus on making sure that industry understands the submittal requirements, that if there's any questions along those lines, that we make sure all expectations are clear so we get better quality proposals.
One of the things I'd have to think about that, though, is that is the case in some cases, but not always the case, because there's generally what seems to be a fear on the government side of sharing too much or giving too much. So we often see industry days coming across as pretty much one-sided. The government brings industry into a room, cites a bunch of requirements that's read off of a screen, takes no questions, and says thank you, see you later. And so it really doesn't end up being a dialogue in those cases, and it really probably, in my opinion, isn't really as beneficial, because it didn't have those insights. If you present a requirement, we perhaps have had experiences on a particular delivery that says, well, wait a minute, you're getting ready to run into a pit and you don't know it, and I want to be able to tell you that, but if you don't entertain those questions or have that dialogue, then we get stuck, and it really isn't as beneficial in those cases when it's one way.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't suggesting it should be one way.
No, I know you weren't.
It's our getting to know each other time. So we need to use it that way.
You kind of mentioned the information. Can you talk a little bit about the types of information that's shared during the conferences?
Well, sure. On the pre-solicitation side, from the government's perspective, we're going to share as much as we possibly can. We're not going to give you our IGCE, probably. But we're going to tell you where we are in the process. Here's the requirements as they exist today. Hopefully we've actually given them to you before the pre-solicitation conference, so you're a little familiar with them. You're not being hit that day with them. We're going to tell you what we think we're going to do in terms of a timeline. We're going to tell you if we're going to have one-on-one due diligence sessions, if there's going to be site visits, all that kind of stuff. Let you know what we think our schedule is so you can plan your schedule. It's a lot more open, as Bjorn suggested earlier, because it's not a formal acquisition yet. We're planning, we're in market research.
Yeah.
Pre-proposal side, if the solicitation's on the street, now the rules are just a little bit different. It's a formal open acquisition now, and we have a different set of rules to follow. We can't be as quite as open. You can't walk up to all the, for example, the requirements people and start asking them questions about a formal acquisition. You're supposed to come to the contracting folks. So the pre-solicitation is really when we have the chance to be the most open, I think.
Right.
I think from the government's perspective, we should be able to communicate what we know and what we don't know in the pre-solicitation conference, and not be fearful of saying we don't know something, because as Jim, you mentioned, this should be a two-way street. So we can communicate to you, hey, we don't know something, tell us what it is that we need to know so we can make those appropriate business decisions, those program decisions, those contractual decisions. It's going to help us and you in the long run.
That's very helpful to industry, because one of industry's biggest parts about before the solicitation is on the street is this something we can do? Is this something that we can win? Let's remember, industry is in it to win it. And if there's 300 potential offers at the conference, not all of them will turn into offers, and many of them are making the decision that this one isn't right for us, or others might say this is just what we want. And at that point, then government is being well served, because you're getting multiple offers, and hopefully they're good, but you're also not getting the offers that waste your time. We all know that when you get 200 of them, step one is to get rid of half of them. And if the pre-solicitation conference is good, then you're going down that road at that point in time.
Yeah,
So industry is making a
minimizing
lot of decisions based on what we're in it for, which is to win, as opposed to what government's in it for, is to take care of the customers.
Well, I
Jim
think
brings up
I'm sorry, Mike. One key point in this discussion is to understand that when the government does pre-solicitation conferences, we're still in market research mode. So a lot of decisions have not been made. And I think industry needs to understand that things are still kind of up in the air.
And we may have suggestions. And when it's
Absolutely.
before it's a formal proposal,
Yes.
then we can still have conversations. And there might be better ways to do that. We can all in industry tell you stories of the government either in a solicitation or just looking for a quote, where they ask for a number of things and services, and the first answer is, you don't have a workable configuration there. Can we help you with that?
Right.
Can we explain? Can we get manufacturers involved and help you with that? So by giving good information, both what you know and what you don't know, as Bjorn said, that's very helpful. Then we can decide, is this one for us? Do we want to spend the energy, the time, the money to develop an offer that we think will be successful?
Right.
Jim hit on something that was probably a little subtle in his comment a moment ago, is that we're both assessing the requirements that you have, but we're actually assessing each other as well, and trying to figure out, do we have the ability to win? Do we have that ability based on what's available in the marketplace amongst our competitors? And there is competition, of course, involved there. So there's two sides of that. So when we're in those more public conferences, we have to both judge against what the requirements are and how we can be the best advocate advisor for those requirements, but also being cautious and careful about what's going on with our competitor who's also in the room relative to that. So Nancy, what you mentioned earlier about one-on-one due diligence sessions, those can be a great addition, because then you can get the opportunity one-on-one with an industry partner who may have run across a potential pitfall that you're getting ready to head towards, or have something in their solution that is a part of what perhaps is the secret sauce from that organization's perspective to bring to bear on those requirements.
Yeah. So I'd like to address this question to Bjorn and Nancy. What are some of the key decisions or considerations that go into determining whether or not to have a pre-proposal or even a pre-solicitation conference?
I would say, and Nancy, you can elaborate, to host a pre-solicitation conference, or any conference for that matter, it's a business decision. Does the juice is the juice worth the squeeze? There's resource issues, there's time constraints, we have to spend money, we have to find the facilities. To do it properly, it takes preparation. And it has to meet the acquisition that we're going to pursue. If it's a low dollar, not complex acquisition, probably not worth it. If it's something we've done repetitively, time and time again, probably not necessary. But if it's a unique, complex acquisition, certainly want to engage industry, get those best practices, get that information. It's a high-level business decision from my perspective. As a director, I'm sure you have something to say about that.
I agree with everything you said, John. One of the other things I would add to that is sometimes we do an acquisition a second time, and we might not have done the pre-solicitation the first time we did the acquisition, but something has changed dramatically with that requirement. Something that we want to make sure everybody knows about because we think it might have an impact on the field of competition. So when we have changes in what might be somewhat historical requirements, but there's something emerging with that customer, and we do some work overseas, and we've seen this with a number of our requirements where it sounds like the same requirement, but a lot has changed in 5 years. So we want to make sure that we communicate that to industry so they're not thinking, well, company A got this last time, our chances of unseating them on the same work this time might not be good. Well, guess what? A lot might have changed in 5 years, and we want to communicate that because we're always trying to increase competition, particularly where we might not have seen as much competition as we prefer to get, the last time around.
Great. So, when the government decides to conduct a pre-solicitation conference, what should it look like? So, let's start with the purpose and goals of the conference. Again, I'm going to turn to my government folks, and then I'll jump back to industry.
Sure. So every conference is going to be unique, or should be, and the purpose should fit the acquisition that the conference is being held for. Going into the conference, the integrated project team needs to have a clear understanding of what their expectations are. As we mentioned earlier, what do they want to gain from the conference? Do we need to further develop our requirements? Do we understand our requirements, but we need to know how we're going to obtain them? Are we in the acquisition planning phase and we don't know what type of the pricing arrangement, the duration? Are we starting from square one, essentially? So the purpose needs to be well thought out, well in advance, to have a meaningful dialogue with industry. And that will allow us to have that synergy with the participants at the Industry Day.
Absolutely. I'll give kind of my simple feel about engaging industry and trying to capture synergy at this stage. As a government contracting officer with my acquisition team, I'm looking to get a best value solution for my clients. I can't do that without industry. I know that. So this is my first chance to court industry, so to speak, to get them to know us and to know what it is that we're looking to accomplish, so we have a better chance of partnering to get that best value solution. The sooner we do that in the process, the better off we're going to be. Ideally, we'd have time to do that all the time, but it doesn't happen that way, unfortunately. A lot of times we get requirements a little too late in the game and we have to speed through these processes, which is very unfortunate, but we can't always control that. But whenever the time is there and we can start that courtship with industry earlier so we get to know each other, I think we have a better chance of serving our clients better.
And the better you know each other, the better offers you have, the better exact proposal you have, which almost always leads to a better outcome.
Yes.
To have the wrong contractor with the wrong proposal, but it sort of almost meets, that's not going to lead to a good outcome. So you want both the right contractor and the right system, the right proposal, so that now it's meeting your objectives. So exchanging that information is really the key to it, to narrow the field down, because eventually, in most cases, you narrow it down to one. So the sooner you can start that process of narrowing it down, that not only helps the government, that helps industry. Because industry, don't take it the wrong way, but doesn't want to waste their time with something that we can't do that. So if we find that out way late in the process, then we could have been doing something else in the time. So the earlier with the information, and the more information, the better.
And I would say conversely, not just narrowing down the field, but increasing the field at times. Oftentimes, those acquisitions are sole sourced to the same incumbent, and industry has the perception that they can never break into that program, to that office. But if we have those conferences, we can disclose that information that wasn't readily available in previous acquisitions for whatever reason or the other. And we've got, for the small business community, those small businesses that can sub with the prime, they can even submit their own proposal and have that chance to showcase their towns, their resources, and provide, as Nancy mentioned, that best value
It's
solution.
absolutely equal opportunity for a conference like that. Anybody can go, and it particularly helps small businesses, especially new small businesses, because you already know the existing partners, the ones that you're used to working with, and a new opportunity. As you say, there might be additional competition, new businesses that didn't exist the last time,
Exactly.
5 years ago.
One of the keys there is the tone of the industry they held. I mean, you set a tone, and you're either saying, I'm open to that competition, or you're setting a tone that says, I'm doing this as a matter of course. I'm not really open to it, but I'm doing it because it's a part of the process. So you got to be careful with that a little bit. And if you're and sometimes you don't get the intended result, and it's really by mistake. If you wanting competition, wanting to divulge, getting that, but not sharing enough information leaves back not getting enough competition. So it does have to be handled properly in what seems to be a true, honest sharing of information. In order to get a proposal submitted by any industry partner, there's a lot of factors that go into that decision, and it's an investment. So people don't. Proposals aren't free. They cost money to be put together. They cost. We have to have time and resources to put them together. So every industry partner that's out there ready to respond to those requirements has got to make a decision. Am I going to invest the time? Am I going to invest the money it's going to take to go after that? And we're going to do that by making an assessment of our probability of win. What's going on with the competition? How open was the communication? How clear were the requirements? How well can we understand them and respond to them? Is it worth the investment? We're always off of a factor of probability of win. Where am I going to be able to win this?
Right.
As Jim said earlier, we're in it to win it.
Right.
And it's not worth the investment frequently, because proposals, oddly enough, aren't even, they cost money, but they often cost a lot of money. And if it's a large, complex requirement, those responses can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to create, and for large businesses and small businesses alike, it's not the size of the business that makes that determination. It's the confidence that they have in the ability to win that's going to drive their ability to respond. Small businesses aren't going to have the resources, and people think that large businesses do, but the fact is they don't. Large businesses are really trying to make sure they're good stewards of the money that they earn. They're trying to earn and make a good business, but they have to, every proposal is an investment for them.
Right. So it's time and money and
Sure.
resources actually on both sides. So having said that, who should attend these conferences? And I'm gonna ask industry, from your perspective, who do you feel are the best individuals to attend these conferences?
So that's and I'll start, and Jim, I know you have a view on this as well, but it's really going to depend on the industry partner who's going to be the most appropriate to attend, and it really also depends a lot on the information. I know in our organization, we're divided into business units, so the appropriate business unit representative, some of the decision makers that are part of that business unit up at a more executive level are going to be appropriate to attend. But oftentimes we're going to want our proposal writers and some key contract personnel, depending on how well we know what's going on. If we have good information before the conference, we'll better craft the folks who attend for us, and that personnel will change depending on what we know. If we know very little about the requirement, but we're intrigued or interested, it may just be our business development team that goes out to gather more requirements so that we can better analyze and make a better decision on whether or not we have the capability of really performing the work.
Right. So knowing is going to drive the type of people that's in.
Sure,
that you send.
and that varies from everyone from the CEO down to a proposal writer that could potentially attend, and we're going to, and often dependent also on the limitations. If we can only send a couple of people, it probably will be key key personnel that perhaps would be working
Yes.
that requirement, or a key decision maker for that part of our business.
Jim, did you want to jump in?
Sure, and agree with all of that. It depends on the proposal, what you know about it, who should go, and everything else. And the limited number of people sometimes is a problem. We'd like to have more, and we understand why there's limits. Typically, our view is the capture team, the proposal team, first and foremost, because they're familiar with what a proposal is, what goes into it, and why. Subject matter experts, so depending on what it is government is looking for,
requirement.
hopefully the people that understand what it is you're looking for. We don't have those people. Clearly, that's a no-bid decision. But also personnel within the company that is familiar with the agency's goals, what the agency has done in the past, the legacy information. Have we done things there before? Have we
Right.
provided product? Have we provided services to that agency before, where we have some familiarity, which can translate into an advantage, which we're all looking for, and what we think we can do better than somebody else.
Right.
And then the size of the business, I think, determines a little bit who can attend. A very small business, you're looking at the CEO or the owner.
Right.
A large business, you're looking at a professional team of folks that's what they do, and they're very good at that typically. So it can vary, but
Right.
you got to know the customer, what the customer wants, which is part of the big reason why we're there.
Right.
Okay, customer, what do you want?
Yeah.
How do you want it? When do you want it?
Right.
How much do you want to spend, or how little?
Right. I think you hit on a lot of key points, but one in particular is knowing the agency, knowing
Yes.
their buying habits. That'll give you a lot of good intel and help you decide on whether or not this is something that you should go after.
That's one of the biggest barriers to entry in any given agency, because if you don't know the agency, then how do you know what it is they want? How do
Yes.
they do it? Agencies vary, and it's the classic is the difference between DoD and civilian agencies. But even within the civilian arena, the agencies, they're very different in how they go about things, how they like to buy things, how they like to implement things, and what it is they want. And if you know that, it gives you a real advantage, and that's an advantage to the government.
Absolutely.
Now, potentially, you have a contractor that knows how you work and how things flow. Okay, maybe we can help you a little more there. And to especially a small business that's trying to get into an agency, if they don't know, that's really tough.
Right.
That's an
I
excellent
I can imagine.
Tag one thing onto something that Jim said a moment ago. That's really into the limitation of the number. We know space is always a limiting factor, but one of the things that's often key for us is bringing potential teaming partners with us. And if there's a limitation on space, we have to then provide someone who's going to be the funnel for information. It's always better for people to hear that information directly. And sometimes teaming partners have better insights into either the client or the agency's habits. And it would be great to bring them as we're talking about who should attend, but sometimes those limitations to attendance
Right,
prohibit that.
and if you're successful enough to win the award, this may be a partner that you'll bring on board
that's right.
with you. I would like, before we go further, I'd like to turn to the government team and ask you all the same questions. From the government's perspective, who should attend these conferences? Nancy?
Well, from the contracting side, we always have our contracting team there. So the contracting officer, any contract specialists that are going to support the acquisition will be there. Our technical folks that support us within GSA, our project managers, they'll be there. But one of the most important things, which takes me to something that Jim said, is we try to have our clients there, our client stakeholders, because no matter how well I know that client, I can't speak about their mission like they can. You know, they have a passion for it. They live and breathe it every day. Even the stuff that we've done over in Europe, we've had the clients on the VTC. Not perfect, because technology is not perfect, but they still each got to speak about their particular piece of the requirement like only they could. And that really does give you the chance to better know that client agency. So we're going to bring all those folks to the pre-solicitation conference.
I had mentioned earlier the integrated project team, and I stick by that. The budget and funding folks, because they're a part of the solution as well. We want on appropriation, so we may have a contract that we're ready to award, but if we don't have the funds to fund it, that's an issue. The project sponsor, those internal stakeholders that we have to work with and go through to make sure that every step of the way we get their buy-in and their blessings. So, and I remember Dan Gordon, former administrator of OFPP, suggested that government personnel, contracting officers specifically, I believe, rotate in the private sector to get a better understanding of what it takes to submit those proposals, what are B&P costs, what your take on the process is. I'm not suggesting that having all of our folks attend these conferences is going to get to that level, but I think for folks that have never worked in the private sector, they can have a better understanding and appreciation of what your pain points are, what it takes for you to send your folks to make your business decisions, whether or not you're going to submit your proposal. So getting as many of our folks to attend these conferences ideally will have more efficient and effective dialogue in the background so we can make those effective changes.
And the reverse is also true. So we find out what your limitations are, what you can do, what you can't do. Because many times industry is sitting watching, why don't they do something different?
Right.
And maybe you can't.
Right. Right.
Or maybe there's reasons you don't want to do it that way. And learning that helps. Okay, then maybe you can't do something, but maybe there's another way to do it.
Right.
And in communication, you can come up with that.
I think there's numerous benefits to understanding what it's like to walk in the other shoes. And I know some agencies are starting to look at pilot programs where their folks can rotate out into industry to get that perspective, which I think is fantastic, because I know from the government side, a lot of us have spent our total careers in government. So I mean, it's kind of a guess of what it's like to walk in industry shoes. So I think that's a great step forward and a great idea.
It's tough to do in just a one-time conference, but one of the things that we get an awful lot of value out of, and we're convinced the government does too, is progress meetings. When there's a contract or a job or something like that. And in those progress meetings where the first one is full of people with titles, the fifth one, maybe not. And maybe that's where all the real work is being done.
Yeah,
And that's
well,
where both
yeah.
sides learn that, well, you really wanted this, and then the government is saying, well, so you can also do this. So at some point in time, we find we learn a lot through the life of the contract. So the next one will be better for both sides.
Right.
Because we've learned more with the interaction of the folks actually doing the work on the ground.
Okay.
As opposed to
It's
just
a little
writing.
suggestion of something that you just said I wanted to mention. Detailing our folks out into private industry would be a wonderful thing if we had the resources to detail our folks out into private industry. We don't always.
Yes.
But one of the things we did in our region, which I think was very beneficial, is we had one of our industry partners come in, one of our Alliant vendors. Actually, we had two different vendors come in and speak to us about the decisions that are made, the bid or no bid decision. What
Absolutely.
is that process like? I thought our processes were difficult. It is a very detailed process to decide to capture or try to capture a new opportunity, and that was very valuable learning for our folks, and our industry partners were happy to do it.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on that this is the second in our series. The first was to bid or not to bid, and that's exactly the type of information we got into, and it was extremely eye-opening, because we I guess some of us have the understanding that industry just goes for everything that they see, but there's a whole lot of steps and decision points that go into whether they're going to go for it or not. And one of the things that you mentioned, Mike, is that what are our chances of winning it? Do we really have a good shot of winning this? So yeah, you're absolutely right, Nancy. It is a lot. But now we've talked about the purpose and the goals, and who should attend these conferences. Now let's get into the structure. How should they be structured? And I'm going to ask Nancy to start with that.
Well, I like this answer for everything. It depends.
It's a good answer.
I think it really does depend on the particular requirement and the circumstances surrounding that requirement. I like to have conferences in person, and ideally in a big room, mic, so everybody can come. But as you mentioned, that's not always possible. We can't always get everybody, we can't always get a room that we want that's big enough. And if you have something that's happening overseas, sometimes you need to have a video component. So we have to look at that. One tool that we're making more use of on smaller requirements is our GSA meeting space. That is a valuable tool. And I'm not a technology person, but I like meeting space because it is a way to reach a lot of people.
Yes.
And to be able to share information with, I don't even think there's a limit on how many people can join a
And if there
meeting,
is,
which
it's
is wonderful.
high. Well, we
Yeah.
just used that as well in a recent acquisition. We had a in-person pre-solicitation conference and a virtual component.
Right.
Same information, consistent messaging, but those who could not attend the in-person event got the ability to get the same information. And just to tie back to our earlier conversation, who should attend, since we have the technology, the infrastructure to reach out globally, our clients are across the world, from industry's perspective, you can have, just as I had mentioned, have your internal stakeholders, project sponsors, so you don't have to incur additional B&P costs, travel costs. We all have budget constraints. That's just a reality. But if we leverage technology, we can reach out to more people, again, to ideally get better decision making.
It's a good interactive mix to create a structure that allows for that interaction and solves some of the space problems as well. Not everybody that provides these services is located in the same area necessarily that the procurements are occurring, or even if they are, oftentimes subject matter experts or other people that could be brought to bear aren't here, so there's travel costs potentially engaged in participating. But when you kind of structure your industry day, everything happens in the first few minutes of setting the tone,
Absolutely.
of opening it up, setting up that dialogue, and really the structure around the opening is probably going to set the tone for the whole rest of not just that industry day, but truly it'll probably set the tone for the rest of the procurement process all the way to award, because that's where we start to get that understanding of what kind of dialogue are we really going to have? What kind of interaction are we really looking for? And right from the start, on the industry side, we start making decisions. We start using those factors as data points relative to whether we're going to have the good probability of win, whether or not we have a good solution to the requirements, whether or not it's open. A lot has changed over the last several years, and it's great. More and more of this collaboration has occurred, especially if you mentioned Dan Gordon a few moments ago as he started out the Mythbusters campaign to start opening up. There was such a reservation for talking with industry that was occurring, that this dialogue wasn't happening.
Right.
And he helped facilitate that open, that Mythbusters campaign that says, yes, we can talk. And those talks, I think, have gotten us a long way, because we see things like incumbency win rates are way down. They're not in the 90% range like they used to be. So competition can occur. Someone other than the incumbent can win on requirements, and the communication and dialogue can occur to really make these a better place, both for industry and for government, because it really need to think about the fact that everything that's being done here on both sides affects all of us as American citizens and taxpayers.
You're absolutely right.
So the more we can save money on our acquisitions, the more we can get the better, cleaner solutions into meeting the requirements, the better it is for all of us.
Yeah.
But the tone, the structure of the meeting really starts right from that start. That tone, that desire for that interaction will be set in the first few minutes. And then after that, going through and making sure it continues to be open and welcoming and interactive and responsive. I think we could all say we've also probably all been to the Industry Day meeting where it was a simple presentation. Here's who we are, here's what we do, here's what we want. No questions today, see you later.
Yeah, or if you have questions, put them in writing.
And we may or may not answer them in the future.
Yeah.
But I think a lot has changed since then. We've seen some great interaction, with some of the things that GSA has recently done with the GSA Oasis contract, with the GSA Alliant contract, with the HCATS contract, around using things like Interact and industry days and
Yeah.
open forums and videos. So I think a lot
Yeah.
has gone, but paying attention to the structure, starting it off with the right tone and continuing that structure throughout the initial process is key.
Yeah,
Right.
this can't be
And-
transactional.
Right.
Right.
It's a living, breathing culture and process that we're trying to strive to have an effective acquisition so both parties win ultimately.
Yeah, and I think a key also is to start engaging early in the process.
No, amen.
You know, and again, that's
responsibility for both sides.
yeah, absolutely,
Industry
absolutely,
Industry, if
absolutely.
they're surprised at a pre-solicitation conference, then they're
Yeah,
not doing
you know,
their job.
I've
But-
I've heard from industry that if the first time you hear about a requirement is through FedBizOps, you're already behind.
You're already dead.
Yeah.
But when
yeah.
it comes to the conferences, video has gotten better. But if it's in person, presuming that you have all the stakeholders there from the government side, then there's the opportunity for the conversations immediately afterwards.
Right,
Is
right.
somebody, the network administrator, or if it's a NASA thing, a rocket scientist said something, you can walk over and talk to the rocket scientist
Right,
and,
right.
and get more information, a better understanding.
Yeah.
People may say things that are completely new. The government's trying to do something different and bring more innovation to something, and you have a couple people talk about that. Now you can walk over and talk to them face to face,
Right.
one-on-one. That
Right.
I think proves very valuable.
I agree with you 100%, and it's kind of a trade-off, you know, the in-person ones. I mean, those are always great, but if you look at it from our perspective, and even from industry, we can reach a far greater amount of people through the use of social media, as we did with Alliant and Oasis and some of our other programs.
And in today's world, that's so much easier. And maybe it could be a multi-step process. You can start with something in social media, maybe some video, and then as it gets down to it, then it's a much smaller crowd
Right.
for the in-person. Now you've got the people that are really serious about
Yeah.
it.
The thing I would say too, I mean, as we're focused on industry day events for pre-solicitation and pre-proposal, is really planning the structure, making sure we're able to articulate who's in the room, who is actually there from both, you know, the industry partners, the government representatives. Do you have the client representative and stakeholders in the room? Do you have legal in the room? Do you have the contracting officer in the room? Who is there? So structuring it in such a way with the right people and the communications around who's there, but then with the right content, with
Right.
what the requirements are, what you're really looking for, and how to have a meaningful dialogue that will really inform the decisions on both sides and make that work. And what are be honest about the potholes and pitfalls and constraints that are on that particular procurement from that particular agency. You know, if we hide that in the dialogue, we can't really respond. And sometimes you're sitting there scratching your head, why would you have this particular element as a requirement, or why would you take that particular approach? And often it's because we just don't understand the constraint that is on that requirement that's driving it in that direction. You know, what is the reason and strategy for the pricing approach? What's going to be and produce the best result? And earlier, Nancy, you said you might not share the IGCE. Why not? And we've seen with FedSim that's one of the primary things they do. They work very hard to put a lot of effort into that, and it sets a boundary in a place so that we understand where you're driving to and the constraints on your price. So maybe not in all circumstances, but when it's appropriate and when it's really
I
there.
think that FedSim did a range.
It's a range.
Yeah.
No, it's always a
Okay.
range, but they've done a lot of work on the back end that most folks don't know about to create their government estimate
Right.
for that, and that's why they know what that range is,
Yeah.
and they know it pretty tightly,
I
actually.
think the takeaway is that it's not that we can't provide it, it's in what context, and is there a mutual benefit to disclosing, and not just the IGC, but beyond that, that sensitive information that
Sure.
legal counsel says, no, you can't disclose that right now, or historically we haven't provided it. So I would agree with you, Mike. There are times where disclosing financial information, IGC, is appropriate because in turn it does it's a prudent business decision, but you have to make that business decision, go through legal counsel, get the blessing from the internal stakeholders, and that cultural change is certainly going to be a barrier for us.
Sure.
That is not going to change anytime soon.
Let me add a little clarity to that too, because in some sense it's not always a good idea for you to share it either, because it will drive to a particular thing.
Sure.
And that's not what we want in our competition either. So the boundaries, the kind of the idea, the range
takes care of that
statement
concern a
makes
little bit.
sense. And that, always sharing a range might be a good idea. We see them a lot with procurements that are run from FedSim and a few times outside of that. But it at least gives us an idea that you've done your homework, and we can do our homework to make sure that our thinking is in alignment with your thinking.
Right, and it kind of narrows the universe a little bit. But Bjorn, with a typical pre-solicitation conference, how is that normally structured? I mean, what are some of the things that the government does from the beginning, and actually throughout the conference? I mean, how do we start it off? That's what I'm getting
I
at.
think the industry day, the pre-solicitation conference starts before the conference itself. In, as Mike mentioned, the preparation. So you can have the best information ready to go. If you haven't prepared for the conference itself, it's
Right.
all for naught. So making sure that you've checked your boxes, you've done your due diligence, you're ready to go to disseminate that information. You're going in there with open eyes, open ears, and you're ready to communicate in good faith that information. You're prepared. You're not just reading slides and bullets and PowerPoints, but you're going to elaborate on that information. My litmus test is if you can push a button and send that information via email, it really shouldn't be a part of an industry day, or you shouldn't host the industry day.
Yeah.
Because you can just
Shouldn't
do
be
that.
necessary.
You should have an engaging conversation, just like what we're doing right now. So from the government's perspective, when a participant comes and they pull us aside or they raise a concern or ask a question, we can scratch our heads and say, good point. We're going to caucus afterwards and say, let's think about that and have perhaps a future industry day or event or make that decision. So again, just to summarize, open eyes, open ears, be prepared and expand upon the information that you're going to have on your slides.
Right. Now, do you think it's important to introduce the industry team to government, to industry?
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and I'm sure industry wants to hear that. And,
Yeah.
and that's probably the most time when the participants have their pen and paper ready to go, because they want to know who those individuals are
Right.
on the acquisition team. I'm sure you'll research who we are, what we've done in the past, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to benefit us because you have the ability. Industry partners are so entrenched with each agency. You probably know our agency structure and organization better than we do.
And we should.
Exactly.
And if we don't, then maybe that's not the conference for us to be at.
Right.
We go to a conference and we make a claim that we know this agency, we know this customer, and you bring out 12 people and you introduce all of them. Okay, we know all of them. That's
Right.
good. We only know 3 of them. Not so
Right.
good.
So what I want to
But
kind of
let me add on
drill.
to his knowing thing
Okay.
there for just a second, because that's a good point in many cases. But also, if we have a strong solution to meet those requirements, that's another case. We may not know the personnel, we may not know the people, and in some cases we might not even know the agency. If you're growing, if you're changing, if you're expanding, in many cases, if you want something you've never had before, you have to do something you've never done before. So you have to go into a place where you don't know people, and that's a lot of what these conferences provide for us is insights into the struggles, the pain points, what your organization is all about, and what you really are after. And I may not know the individual people and the organization as well as I could or should, because I can learn that later. But if I have a good solid solution that's really going to save time or money or resources in some way that I can apply to those requirements with it, even though I don't know you, and bring to bear for that, then that's really what this dialogue starts to bring out.
Right.
And it's not so much a scorecard of how well I already knew you, but it's how well I can serve you. And can I make a mapping there so that I can go to a new place?
I'm glad
Right.
you mentioned that. Do your due diligence after the conference. If you don't know all the key personnel, this isn't the time to come up to us and hand your business card and showcase all of your talents and your resources and what you can provide. There's a time and place for that. Again, we have constraints from our perspective. But if you go in there and say, okay, I don't know X, Y, and Z, but I know their organization, their division, let me go back and see if I can put 2 and 2 together, and then reach out, hey, Mr. Miller, Valley, have you reached out to so-and-so? We can help integrate our acquisition with other offices and again have an effective, efficient dialogue.
Right, right.
Well, I think some of the key things to discuss is the history of the requirement. How did this come to be? The impact that this requirement may have on other programs and stuff. Do you see that as being valuable? I mean, of course you want to know that things like the, as much of the acquisition strategy as we can share in terms of, the performance, the schedule, the place of performance, that kind of stuff. But it just seems like to me that having the background, understanding how this fits into everything, gives you additional insight and helps with the proposal submission.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
And if not the proposal submission, the decision on whether or not you're going to go for this requirement.
it may seem trivial to articulate the history, but not everybody knows the history.
Yeah.
And as both the government starts to walk through the history of the program and industry starts to hear it, it takes you to a whole new place, because you start to understand
Right.
some of the potential things that have occurred that you want to do differently in the future, your new direction, your new objectives. So understanding both the history, understanding a full overview of what the acquisition is all about, what are the actual objectives for the program and for the contract, how do you anticipate moving into that and going forward in transition and making a meaningful handoff if someone's already performing that work. So how is that going to be approached? What is the schedule going to look like? Because we've talked a lot here in many different views of resources, and scheduling those resources is key for you and how you're going to do the acquisition schedule. We've got to align our capture resources if we're going to go after this and have those resources available, work on schedule. The ones that are released on Christmas Eve and do your New Year's Day, we've got to figure out a way to get someone to give up their family time to go after those. And that was a joke, okay, so I'll take that one back. But those do happen. But just the whole schedule and timing of how it's going to go, and where are we going to do the work, and what is expected if we're doing CONUS and OCONUS type delivery, and all of those aspects should be covered as we go through the whole overall review. And it's really for the best interest of both sides, because we get to really know the full terms of what's going to happen.
In terms of planning for the conference, I think one thing that I think is beneficial to industry, and if it's not, then please correct me, but is if we do have draft requirements, get them out to you, a couple weeks ahead of that industry day, because that gives you a chance to at least know as much as we know at that point in time. They might not be nailed down, but sometimes they're decent enough for you to read through and come with an expectation, a little bit of an understanding of what we're looking for, and maybe offer some more meaningful kind of comments or foster up some questions for us.
It's a great point, but what we run into the most often is there's a fear on the government side. I'm giving you something incomplete, you're going to make the wrong conclusion from it. So
That's what
you
the
see that
draft
fear.
watermark is for.
Well, that's right. And you need to both understand that.
Yes.
Both on our side to say, well, we understand these are incomplete, and thank you for sharing what you had, at least. Let us help you complete them. But I think there's also a fear. There's a fear factor in a lot of these, especially in the dialogue. But there's a fear factor in sharing things that are incomplete, because it causes two potential problems. One, a misunderstanding of what's going to occur, and secondly, being held accountable for something that now is going to have to change because circumstances have changed. And now you've let it out, and you said, well, wait a minute, you were on that before and you were good with it because you had it in your materials, and now you want to change it. We'll do that. Right. We're going to go back and hold you to that. So that there's not only a fear, but it's justified. It does have a point of justification. They weren't complete, and now I'm locked into them because I shared them.
I guess this goes back to the earlier question, what should be done at a typical industry day, and especially in a pre-solicitation conference, set those expectations up early. So this is just a draft document requirements. It can change, and if it does change, we're going to update industry in some of those changes. So you can appreciate what those changes are, fit gap analysis. I like to look at my acquisition plan. What elements of my plan are incomplete, are missing entirely, and how can I incorporate those elements into my talking points at the conference? Because ultimately, I can make those business decisions, or the team can make those business decisions, and arrive at a total best value solution at the end.
But really, in every solicitation, isn't it all a draft until you issue it?
It is.
So it's this is what we're thinking, and maybe there's multiple steps along the way, and if the contractors are doing a good job, they're in discussion with you ahead of time, way before the pre-solicitation. It's draft, you refine it. Now, you might be really spot on, and there's a few changes, but you might not be. And that's part of our job, is to figure that out. And really, the response to all of that information, and more information earlier is better, the response to it, in most cases, there's really only one right answer.
Right.
That's the awardee. But everything is draft until you put it on the street.
And again, I think a key is to understand that we're still doing market research. I mean, even when
Sure.
we issue
That's the conversation.
RFIs,
Yes.
requests for information,
Sure.
that's not to say that this is going to lead to a particular procurement. We're seeing what's out there. You know, we're doing our due diligence in terms of market research and trying to gain market intelligence.
Sure, and seen many a RFI or something coming from the government where this is what we want, and everyone in industry looks at it and says, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's what we want. How do we get there?
Right.
So that's draft,
Yes.
and it's the idea, it's what you're thinking about, and
Yes.
can, in good communication, truly working as partners, can you get there with the help of industry? Because without the help of industry, you're never going to get there, since you don't build that stuff.
Exactly.
So you need it from someplace, and maybe you never get to everything you want, but maybe you get most of the way there. Sometimes, okay. We've heard many elected officials say, this is what we want to do. And in getting to the moon in 8 years, turned out to be pretty difficult. We
Right.
could not do it on the day
Right.
that it was first suggested.
But you're
We got there.
absolutely right. I mean, we don't invest in technology. I mean, we have to rely on industry for that. We don't do that type of. I mean, that's not what we're set up to do. We kind of ride the wave of what's out there, but
Yes, but sometimes
we don't fund it.
No, but sometimes you lead that by asking for things that don't exist
Exist,
today.
yes,
This is what we
yes.
want. And the government, I think, has been maligned many times by saying, well, you're behind everybody else. Okay, sometimes you are on something. But sometimes you're not. Sometimes this is what we want to do. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to do for this citizenry to accomplish the mission and get the job done,
Right.
whatever it is. And sometimes that requires really good thinking and working with industry to develop a solution that didn't exist the year before.
Absolutely.
And now everything's better for everybody.
Right, and that's why the partnership is so critical. Absolutely so critical.
And the more we know of what it is you want to do, then the better enabled we're to say that we think we can do that. Or maybe we think you're a little bit crazy now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Maybe
You're
we
talking
can get
pie
there.
in the sky. It's
Well,
not going to happen, but
But when it
yeah.
does happen, then it's great for both sides. For
Absolutely.
everybody.
And
Absolutely.
it does. There's a lot of complex solutions being delivered in a highly regulated environment. This is very much a difficult thing to do. But,
Yes, it
One
is.
of the things you said about the best value is often one that doesn't get discussed enough, and because what best value means in one agency will be different to what it means in the next and the next one over, and what it means to each person individually. And a lot of times they'll also throw into the best value equation is innovation. We want innovation and best value, but yet we can't define what either one of those are. Innovation is in the eye of the beholder. What's innovative for one may not be as innovative for another. And so we have a hard time in the innovation and value categories in really describing what it is. What is it that's valuable to me that I'm going to make that decision? And we go with the generics, and we try to stack it down to prices last. But what we don't put in each of those is what's the real differentiators. What makes solution A more valuable than solution B and
Yeah.
more valuable than solution C?
Sure.
Other than just some very generic view on what that value proposition is. Your technical is more valuable to me. Well, what in that technical makes it more valuable? Is it some way of innovation? So what's the definition for that innovation in that technical that makes it more valuable? 'Cause it makes a more difficult decision process for you, and it makes it a more difficult response process for us
Yeah.
without those definitions as clearly as we. So in our conversations, perhaps one of the things we ought to spend some more focused time on in those industry days is how can we differentiate the value that's brought from one to the other. And it really goes from everything from professional services down to ink pens. Why are there 113 different ink pen styles on the market today? Because someone thinks the Mont Blanc is more valuable than the Bic.
Right.
And they're able to express the difference in what makes that one more valuable to them.
And that's part of
Yeah.
why the term industry day is not defined in the FAR. We're
Right.
talking about something that has been done quite often, should be continued to be executed, but it's not defined in a highly regulated environment. And that's probably because each acquisition is unique, and it allows the program and contracting offices to
To define it
establish
themselves.
exactly what they need, how they need it,
Yeah.
so they can come up with what their definition of best value is.
Yeah, and
I
it's
think
very
that's where we struggle.
subjective.
That's where we really struggle, is defining that. So as we're organizing these industry days, we have to figure out ways to put that into that structure
Sure.
in the time frame to have that dialogue.
I think what we're all seeing here and saying is that best value is subjective.
Sure.
And it's almost elusive to describe. It's like I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. Okay. So, but we've talked a lot about the structure of the conference and the goals, the purpose, the expectations. But what can we all do, industry and government, to ensure that these types of conferences yield meaningful and rich outcomes? Bjorn.
Again, I would say it goes back to the preparation. Industry days and pre-solicitation conferences I've held were successful because we communicated that event well before the event itself. And it allowed the participants, the right number of participants and the specific participants to come, be prepared to give us questions, to raise those concerns, provide us meaningful feedback. So it wasn't just a check the box event. We could sit down, we could present our information, we could elaborate on that information, but in turn, we had questions and comments that we could further elaborate upon. So from the government's perspective, I would highly recommend that there be a lot of due diligence and preparation well in advance. It just doesn't, you can't create the event and have the event overnight. There's a lot of things that have to transpire well before, especially if you've got a large audience that you're expecting to attend.
Right.
I think you were dead on when you said it goes right back to the planning. If you not only plan what you're going to present, you also need to plan the expected outcomes. What are the results? What is it I want from the industry day? Do I want better definement on my requirements and make sure that industry understands those and is not just understanding them, but kind of indicating that they're possible and can be delivered? Is my acquisition strategy appropriate for both time frame, for making sure that we're going to be able to meet these requirements, making sure we're going to get competition, making sure we're going to get good responses? So if you predefine some of those expected outcomes, those goals for it shouldn't be, the goal shouldn't be just to have an industry day.
Exactly.
If that's the goal, then don't have the industry day. Just send the materials out, and you're probably done. But if the goal should be set to acquire multiple aspects of what you want in the acquisition and the acquisition strategy, and concurrence. I think one of the goals should be, does industry concur with both the strategy and the requirements? And if not, where do we need to make adjustments and tweaks to this process? And that's an outcome of the meeting and the event.
Like, I would agree totally. If you're going to have an industry day just to have an industry day, it's a waste of time. And
Everybody's
labor,
time.
resources to do an industry day from our side as well as from our industry partner side, it's a lot of work. So we need to come to the table with being willing to share information from our side, but we also need you to share information. So if we're going to have these industry days, are you going to be willing to tell us, about the things that need to change or the things you want us to change? And if not that day, in a follow-up opportunity to submit comments following up to the industry day. We want that feedback, we really do. We don't get a lot of it sometimes in the actual industry day forum, and I think that's a competition thing. Partners don't necessarily want to talk in front of other industry partners, but we want that feedback. So if that means submitting comments to us after the industry day, that works too.
Yeah, I'll use your answer from before. It depends.
Yeah.
Because we do want to share, but the environment does put limitations on that. If there's a strategic element of what I would want to share that would give away some of my strategic positioning to win, I'm going to have a hard time sharing that. The other factor, and I don't know how we can overcome this, that even on things that potentially could be said, is the face factor, I'll call it. If I criticize your strategy, or if I say something that might be like, well, that's the dumbest approach I've ever heard, it could sound like it's coming off offensive to your strategy, to your thinking, to your expertise as an acquisition professional. And so sometimes those are reserved. They're held back because not only are we've got a partnership relationship, I've got to be careful of what you think of me in regards to that. So people will reserve comments sometimes when it's like, that approach will never get you the result you want. You want a device that has 400,000 gallons of fuel, a nuclear weapon, and 200,000 moving parts for the lowest price technically acceptable. It's like boggles your mind. That was stolen from the movie Armageddon, by the way. So, as you start to put these things together, it's hard to confront some of those because you feel as if you'll lose face with the agency that's doing the procurement. So if there's a way we can figure out how to remove some of those factors from the industry day, and that again is in the dialogue and the setup and the preparation, you get more honest feedback.
And I think the more individuals, going back to our earlier conversation, that the government brings to the table, you'll have individuals within the team that will concur with industry's perspective. It doesn't make sense. It's not just because we made a decision or we're contemplating a decision that everybody's buying into that. And two, to help facilitate the conversation and the sharing of information from industry, I would say the government needs to do a better job at those follow-on conversations. Again, this is not just a one-transactional, one-time deal. You have a conference or an industry day, a pre-solicitation conference, but you can have those one-on-one meetings thereafter, and equitably, of course. Or what we've done in the past is come up with a group email. So the integrated project team has access to it, not just the contracting officer or the program manager. So we can see responses from industry partners, and it's shared in real time to everybody, and we can discuss internally thereafter. So just trying to maximize the use of technology, the sharing of information, and the exposure to everybody who ultimately is going to be working on the acquisition or having input in the acquisition. Definitely the government can work on.
Yeah, and maybe there's some way to share in a forum that doesn't allow some of the, if I've got a secret sauce, a new industry development that I've created that I have from my own, I'm not going to be able to share that with my competitor, because then they have the same thing, especially when it's kind of the knowledge-based capability. Here is the actual answer that you need, and then everybody has the same answer. Those are tough. So the due diligence sessions and the one-on-ones might be a good follow-up, but you're going to be presented with the problem of time. After the industry day is done, we've got a little bit of concurrence. We're out of time. The fuse is already burnt out, and now we need to get that one done. So it's going to be hard to resolve that. maybe it's an interactive private social media type of deal with just the government and single industry partners to share that on the back end. I don't know what the true solution is, but that's always going to be difficult going forward.
I think it just depends on the acquisition.
It does. It depends. You
depends.
have the standard answer for all questions. It
Can't go wrong.
depends.
Legal counsel will love it.
Industry is, I think, by and large, very willing to share information. But to be really blunt about it, we're not always sure it's all that well received by the government.
I would agree with active, the government listening. Some indicated that you heard what was said. I would agree with you 100% on that.
Sure, and let's remember that in that relationship, who has all the power? And it's the contracting officer. So for industry to say, we think you're doing something wrong, may not have the desired result for either side. And to try to say there's a better way to do it may not have the desired result. It may, but maybe not. So, giving advice or giving information is very similar to giving restaurant referrals. I'll be happy to give you my best restaurant referral. I sure hope your meal is good. Because it's not. You're never going to ask me for anything again.
Right. Well, Jim, I understand that, but as we've talked about earlier, we're operating in a highly regulated environment. And oftentimes, it may come across as if we're not listening. We don't want to hear it. But then when we look at the constraints that we're operating in, it may be something that we absolutely can't do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And typically when it is constrained or limited or regulated in some way, if we're really in this business, we should be aware of that. And if we're not, that's our bad. That's our problem. But don't want to paint everybody with the big broad brush. There's some very good contracting folks in the government. Not everybody is in the top half of the class. So, while there be criticisms, they don't apply to everybody. We have some customers that the relationship is just amazing. It's just so good. And then others that it's really a struggle. And it's a struggle to say anything other than yes.
That's unfortunate, but it's also
It
a
is.
reality. And I would say that don't let those few dampen your resolve to
Oh, no, we
provide
don't.
meaningful
We
information,
don't.
because you never know.
And if you do, then you're not going to grow.
Exactly.
The reverse is also true. We know that in government, there's all sorts of people that you're talking to industry all the time, and there's some folks in industry you don't want to talk to, and then some you do. Some you get good stuff from, some you get not so good. So I think it's a very natural thing, but it is real that there are contracting officers or network administrators or technical folks that you can talk to and say, can I tell you something? And they say, please. And others, we know what we're doing here. Okay, but that last configuration doesn't work by itself, so maybe you don't. There's good and bad in both industry and in the government, and that's a difficult thing. I'm sure every contractor has also had the situation where after much gnashing of teeth, finally somebody from the government decides to call up and say, we need to tell you you're really not doing a good job here. No one wants to hear that, but you have to give that message sometimes. And if the contractor is good, their response will be, how can I fix it? Please help me here. And if the response is, we've been in business for a long time, we know what we're doing, well, they're probably not going to get the next award.
You got to be agile and flexible.
Sure,
in
on both
that
sides.
delivery. And the one element that you said is really true. Is perception is reality, and so we've got to work carefully to manage the perceptions.
Yes.
And it not to be so quick to judge the other side, but manage the perceptions that are occurring and openly talk about them.
And
Each
ha-
side needs to trust each other.
Yes, and
Yeah.
have respect for both
Exactly.
sides, because
Yeah.
you talked earlier about all of the criteria and all of the decision-making you go through, and then when you saw a view of industry, that it's equally complex, just very different. But we can only get to a good outcome by getting together, because if either side isn't real and honest and straightforward and performing, then it's not going to work out well
Right.
for either side.
It may be cliche, but there's no I in team, and the team
Yes.
is going to ultimately be the government and the contractor.
Right.
So
Right.
Yeah, and
think
so,
about in those terms.
and sometimes some of the best results come after a difficult discussion,
Exactly.
Wow.
where one party goes in and says, this isn't working, and the other party says, we didn't think so either. Okay, good, now we can talk. But you know, where there's button of heads, that's never going to have a good outcome. But
Right.
everybody has to be invested and respectful to get to that good outcome and perform.
You know, one of the things that we really strive to be is that the strategic advisor to our partner, because if we're not successful, we're not successful, and if we're not honest about getting to that success point, both of us are going to fail. And if we both fail, it leads to. Now, it doesn't mean everything that goes out there. There's lots of failures that have occurred, and they happen all the time, and we learn from them. And oftentimes, just as Jim just said, by having that difficult conversation or having that point that something didn't go quite the way we planned it, actually prepares us better for moving into the future. We are better equipped, better prepared, and better understand how to deal with that situation when we run across it the next time, because we felt it so closely when we ran across it the first time.
And that applies to both sides.
Absolutely.
Oh,
I'm
it
speaking to both sides.
Yeah.
It's just-
Absolutely applies to both sides. As a contracting officer, there's nothing that makes me happier than a successful contract. Nothing.
Yeah.
So if this
I'm
helps
sure.
us get there, we'll just keep talking. I would encourage you, Jim, you can give me feedback anytime.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
listen and I won't hold it against
And
you.
sometime we need to come back and really spend a lot of focused time on the whole RFI concept that we brought up earlier, because there's a lot of things I think that can be done there to really tighten that up and make it more meaningful, because RFIs cost money just as proposals cost money, and they need to be meaningful. So someday maybe we can come back to the table and bring up that topic, but it also is an informer to the industry day in some sense, either before a pre-solicitation or before pre-proposal, somewhere in the process to gather the information and to gather meaningful data that's needed to make some of these decisions. So it
Yeah.
really is a key player in the process.
I agree 100%. So pre-solicitation conferences are a means of early engagement with industry, bringing industry into the loop earlier. And as we've discussed, there are numerous benefits to both sides in doing that. I want to thank everybody for their wonderful insight, great conversation that you've brought to us today. But before we wrap up, based on the conversation that we've had today, and in the context of engaging with industry through Industry Day conferences, what key takeaways would you leave our viewers with today? And I'm going to start with Jim.
Is that good or bad? Communication on both sides.
Communication.
Let's talk.
Okay.
Then if we talk, then we can figure out what's the objective, what do we need to do, how do we get there.
Okay.
From an industry side, are we the right contractor to do the job?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we're not, maybe we are. What's our chance of win? And from the government side, can we get what we want, what we need, at the price we need to get it? We have to acknowledge price is a very large factor. No matter how you spin it, it's still a pretty important factor. But communicating all of that at every stage, more information earlier, real on both sides, honesty, respect. That's what I think, communication.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to switch and go to Bjorn.
I would say don't be afraid to share information from the government side. And when you do, follow up with that communication. So don't just check that box. The first hurdle is to get that information out the door. The next hurdle is to what are you going to do with that information that you've received in turn. So it's a balancing act. Be prepared to get a lot of information from industry, but knowing that you're going to arrive at a better business decision and better contract.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Mike.
I would say one of the key things is planning. We've said it many times. The key is planning and preparation and knowing what you expect. out of it, making sure that if it's to gain clearer understanding of requirements, that we're meeting that goal. If it's to gain clearer understanding of the acquisition strategy, that you're meeting that goal, and the dialogue supports and informs those goals, and then we walk away with some actual results. And neither side needs to go to an industry day that doesn't meet the goals established in the beginning. And if you don't establish those goals, then everybody walks away feeling what really just happened. So clear goals and clear dialogue towards meeting those goals throughout the process is really going to do. And for my industry compatriots would be, let's embrace the competition and let's help the dialogue and make it really work.
Okay, Nancy, I'll let you do the final words.
Well, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. Ultimately, we have the same customer, the client agency, and we both want the same thing for that client agency. Whether you're in it on the contractor side, the industry partner side, I know it's a business, you're in it to win it, but ultimately you want your customer to be happy, and we want our customers to be happy. We want that end user to be happy. If we don't understand each other, that's not going to happen. The more we can do on the front end, whether it's the pre-solicitation conference, which we've pretty much been focusing on here today,
Yes.
or the pre-proposal conference a little later down the road, the more we can do in those forums to ensure that outcome as partners, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Bjorn, Nancy, Mike, and Jim, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to visit with us today and provide your incredible insights. This has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure our viewers have it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
This wraps up our session on Industry Day conferences. Again, my name is Melissa Gary, and thank you for spending time with us today. Have a wonderful week.
Our thanks again to Melissa Gary and all of our participants in today's seminar. And our thanks to you too, our viewing audience. We hope you found today's seminar beneficial, as we're sure it gives us all a much better understanding of Industry Day conferences and how to plan and conduct them to the greatest effect and value serving the American taxpayer. Stay tuned as we take a short break. After, we'll return with our guests to answer a few of your questions. We'll be right back. Thank you for returning to the Can We Talk Industry Day Conferences Acquisition Seminar question and answer portion. Joining us again are Melissa Gary, Procurement Ombudsman, U.S. General Services Administration, Bjorn Miller, Senior Contracting Officer, U.S. General Services Administration, Nancy Valet, Director of Acquisition Operations, U.S. General Services Administration, Michael Pullen, Director of Strategic Operations, CGI Federal, and Jim Connell, Vice President of Contracts and Compliance, Red River Computing Company. So let's jump into the great questions we've received from our audience members. Now the first question is, couldn't pre-solicitation with industry give us an unfair advantage to someone? What's confidential at this point?
That's a great question. Yes and no. We could, from the government's perspective, give an unfair advantage to someone if we do disclose information that we shouldn't. So again, as we mentioned in our presentation, it's all about your due diligence and your planning. Make sure that the information you provide, you can provide, and oftentimes the attendees list is more than what the people who want to participate is more than who can. So make sure that you publicize the information you provided at the industry day through FedBiz Ops, through your agency's portal, and that will expand the number of partners that actually gain that information, and you'll reduce the unfair advantage.
Fantastic. Great. Let's take the next question then if we can. Since many vendors support the government virtually, are there unique processes and or procedures that should be utilized for conducting a virtual Industry Day conference?
Well, the first thing I would say is you really want to make sure that you have your technology lined up. If you're doing something virtually, a big fallback can be your technology failing you in some way. A simple example would be if you set up a bridge line and you don't have enough bridge line capacity to have everybody call in at one time. So make sure you have that technology set up, do a run ahead of time to make sure everything works. Also, from the government side, it's best to have everybody that's going to participate from the government side in one place. That way you can coordinate your response, you can coordinate your presentation. If you're spread out, the government team's spread out, it gets very difficult to do. And then certainly keep in mind it is a resource saver, so anytime that you can do it virtually, it's a good idea, particularly when you're working with small businesses, that it saves them the expense of travel. But again, I'm going to go back to technology. Make sure that technology is reliable.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, let's move on to the next question then. Have you found a good example or found good examples of a successful pre-solicitation and or pre-proposal conference? And why was it considered a good event?
Well, I'll pat myself on the back on this one. GSA hosted an industry day, a pre-solicitation conference last year for the HCATS acquisition. And it was successful because we had two components of that event, a live component and a virtual component. And we did that because we had far more interested parties that could attend that we had space available for. So we, again, as to my previous response, we were able to reduce the risk of having unfair competition, and we wanted to make sure that as broad an audience capture the information we wanted to disseminate, and we got a lot of positive feedback from that. We used Meeting Space, which is a Windows-based application, and again, it was very successful. It was live feedback, and we just disseminated that information in real time.
Fantastic. So again, let's move along to the next question we have here. Is the Industry Day conference in lieu of a request for information in addition to that RFI, or is it something entirely independent?
An Industry Day conference is different from an RFI. Not to say that they're completely independent, but the main difference between the two is with an Industry Day conference, it provides an opportunity for an exchange of information between government and industry, whereas an RFI, we send out the document and we request information back. We may move forward with that information or we may not. So again, the key difference is one provides an opportunity for an exchange of information, whereas the other is more one-sided.
Outstanding. Good. Well, let's take a look then at the next question if we can. How do you promote dialogue during conferences? Many times, industry doesn't want to reveal their cards to their competitors, so should we not ask any questions?
Well, asking questions is always good, and it's up to industry to protect their secrets by themselves, of course. So having the good communication and getting as much information out in both directions really makes the conferences much more valuable to both sides. But there always remains that part in industry that is the secret sauce, is the popular phrase these days, and we don't want to share that with our competitors. You get to see it when we give you your proposal, but you need questions because you need answers. And so ask as many as possible, and then there can be follow-up discussions if necessary to get more information out.
Well, probably to add on to that a little bit too, remember that for a majority of just individual people, speaking in public is one of the scariest things that people do. I think I heard a comedian say recently that the list of scariest things were speaking in public, and then death was number 2 after speaking in public. So that people, are just fearful of speaking up, not just because of identifying or revealing some type of competitive information of what they have for the solution. It's just a public environment. So sometimes that plays into effect just as much as giving up or revealing their cards.
That sounds good. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's move along then to the next question. About the structure of the conference. Should the structure of the conference be the same regardless of whether it's conducted in person or virtually?
No, it really depends on what you're trying to disseminate, what audience you're trying to capture. If the interested parties are located across the country, if they're located in one central location, you have the space to have these individuals participate. So there's a lot of business decisions that will go into your pre-solicitation conference, and you have to take everything into consideration.
Okay, great. Again, let's move along then to the next question, and that is about the information. Should the information, specifically questions and answers discussed during the conference, be made available to the public? And if so, what's the best method for disseminating that information?
Absolutely. The questions should be made available, questions and answers should be made available to the public. Again, this whole process is about transparency and reaching as many people as we can in order to increase our competition. There could be instances where individuals would like to attend a particular conference and they can't. So by providing this information publicly, those individuals get to see and understand and hear the information that was discussed during the session. So absolutely, yes, it should be shared. One of the methods in which I would recommend we share it is to utilize social media. A lot of agencies have Twitter or Facebook accounts, they have blogs. Those channels can prove very productive and very helpful in getting the information out.
Definitely good advice for getting the information out there. So our next question, kind of a tangent to Industry Day conferences, but can you explain more about when one-on-one due diligence sessions are used or would be most valuable?
Certainly. I'd like to caveat this answer by having everybody remember that we're in the pre-solicitation stage here. So open dialogue with industry is encouraged, and there's a lot of value that comes from that open communication. So to lay out a scenario, suppose you have an industry day and everybody that's interested comes to that industry day. There may be some questions back and forth. Ideally, they've seen the solicitation, the pre-solicitation package, so they have an idea what the requirement's about. A lot of times we've found that contractors may be a little reticent about asking too many questions in that environment, but they do have questions and they do have feedback, and that's when a one-on-one due diligence session after an industry day can be particularly valuable. They'll be more willing to share information. Information can flow both ways. it's an ideal setting for information exchange where folks don't have to feel like they need to protect anything.
Heck,
You know, and maybe to add on from the industry side of things, you can have the due diligence session before your industry day or after. And often I think people get hung up with thinking perhaps it's unfair to have one-on-one sessions, but you're not having one-on-one sessions with just one. I think you would, you're open to invite those due diligence sessions with industry partners who can have information to bear, and open that opportunity up, just like an industry day, to those who are interested in participating. We've seen this occur with GSA Alliant for the Alliant 2 contract, where they held almost 200 one-on-one due diligence sessions for the contract, as well as multiple industry days, all of which provided a great open dialogue to really craft the requirements for that solicitation in that contract.
fantastic, fantastic. Well, the next question we have here, probably a problem I think all of us would like to have. I'm hosting an industry day and have more attendees who are interested in attending than available space. What can I do to ensure all interested parties receive the information?
Okay, one of the things you can do is make sure that the information is provided to everyone who's interested, again, the public. And you can do that, as I mentioned before, using social media tools. Another approach would be, if time permits, is to break the session out into 2 sessions so that you can get more people there in person.
I would even add, we can record these sessions and broadcast that for future dates, so other participants can see or even read that material.
And you know, we've been talking about the fact that technology and in-person have to be 2 separate things. There's no reason we can't have the technology component and the in-person component. All of industry is not located in one location either. So there are potential industry partners that could work with your agency that perhaps are somewhere else headquartered in the country that could participate virtually to your industry day rather than in person. So sometimes an in-person only industry day would require that industry partner to travel perhaps from California to Washington DC
Yes.
to participate. And if you had a combination of both the technology access and the in-person access, gives you a wider range to allow more people and is not as space limiting.
I agree, so that's probably the happy medium to kind of combine the 2.
So much like these acquisition seminars, there are different ways of getting that information out, sharing that information, and interacting.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Very interesting question here. Do you see generational differences in the approach or approaches to industry day conferences or meetings with industry in general? That is, do you see differences amongst people with varying levels of experience? Less experience, are they more reticent, or maybe people with a great amount of experience are more reticent or more willing to engage in industry day conferences or meetings with industry in general?
I would say I haven't seen generational differences per se. I've seen cultural differences. Certain agencies tend to use industry days, I think, more frequently and as a matter of course, more so than other agencies. GSA, I think, is at one end of the spectrum. They make an awful lot of use of industry days. I don't know that that's true across the board for other agencies, so I wouldn't say it's so much generational as maybe cultural within different agencies.
I think that's a great response. What I've seen over the last 10.5 years is a shift away from your traditional, typical sources, FedVisOps, to Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, so on and so forth, to disseminate and socialize that information. And to go to Nancy's point, that cultural shift has benefited both the government and industry, have that transparency and not have everybody just hone in on that one source of information. We get additional information, we can collaborate, again, in real time, more efficiently and effectively. So the cultural change has been more significant than what any generational differences, which I haven't seen.
Yeah, I'd like to add too, that, and I'm going to combine the 2. I see a little bit of both. It's a cultural change, it's also generational. especially for those of us who have been in government for a number of years, we can remember when the relationship between government and industry was somewhat contentious. We were not very trusting of each other. And I think some of the younger folks coming into government now have no memory of that. You know, they can't really identify with what it's like to really have this wall between the two entities. So, but we've gotten smarter over the years, and we've kind of broken that wall down, and we realize that we need each other, and this really has to be a partnership. So I see that change there.
You know, I would say too, I don't know that there's so much a difference in the approach or doing an industry day that's generational, but I think the presentation of those, certainly you don't have to think back that far when you didn't see PowerPoint, when you didn't see WebEx, or you didn't see some type of text your question and answer into the session. And the ability to add more and more people to an industry day via a virtual connection and presence. So those certainly are technological advances and differences because of the time we're in, not so much, and maybe you could call those generational differences because of the change in technology available. It's just like this session here. We would never have a place where we can have the number of attendees that we have today in a brick and mortar facility. We can't find a place where we can bring 2,000 people together all at one time to have a discussion. So the advent of technology is allowing us to break down some of those barriers and be more inclusive of people that really do have an interest in making things different.
Excellent point.
Well, that was fantastic follow-up from you, our viewers, and our panel of presenters. Unfortunately, we're going to need to stop there because that's all the time we have. So to our audience, I thank you for your insightful questions to help build your checklist for successful Industry Day conferences. And to our presenters, I thank you for your answers. Don't forget, the Federal Acquisition Institute has recorded today's seminar, and the video, along with the presentation material you saw, will be posted in the Media Library on fai.gov. You should be able to access these items in a week or so. We appreciate all of the great questions you submitted. You did a great job expanding on the understanding and use of Industry Day conferences. So to sum up, we've covered the differences between pre-solicitation and pre-proposal conferences, defining conference purpose and goals, creating an appropriate conference attendee list, how to structure a conference, ensuring meaningful conference outcomes, and key takeaways. Now go make yourself a great Industry Day. And on behalf of the Federal Acquisition Institute, thank you once again for joining us.